Okay, folks, we're on to part 2 of time management and effective meetings. We got a bit to get through, so I'm going to sort of dive right into it. I'm hoping you get some snippets of thought and things to think about from the last session. I'm going to do a quick recap on just 2 little pieces and a quick exercise before we move on to effective meetings. So in terms of time management, what we're going to continue on with, sorry. A little slow here on the tech side. There we go. All right, so we talked a little bit about why it's important, the benefits, etc., and some principles last time, which we'll do a short little recap on. I've got those tools, a couple of tools we talked about. We'll do a quick exercise, and then we're going to I'll mention a couple of tips, and please feel free to offer your own. These are just some I'm putting up there for consideration. Hopefully, at least one tip will trigger something in you to think about. Then we're going to talk about effective meetings, which are often played directly, as I mentioned before, into time management. So how we do meetings, what we talk about at meetings, do we actually have to have a meeting, and how ground rules and accountability play into that. All right, so let's get moving. Okay, let's see. I'm getting a bit of feedback, so yeah, mute, that would be great. So last time we talked about effectiveness and efficiency. So doing the right thing is often more important than doing things right. Okay, getting feedback here now. I'm just going to take off my headset and talk right into the speaker. All right, so you can still hear me. If you can't hear me, please let me know. In terms of doing things right, oftentimes we get caught in that. We get caught in what's in front of me. I'm just going to do amazing work, but it's not often the right things that we focus on. So because of that, we started talking about last time a couple of different principles. One of them, very quickly, is the Pareto principle, which we discussed around effort. So how much effort you put into something. So if you put a lot of effort into something and you're not getting very much in results, what's the point? Having said that, most of our work that we do, often 20% of the effort, the things that we really focus on, that was the right things that we should be doing, actually create most of the results for us. So that was one tool that we talked about. The one we're going to focus on for a quick exercise is the Eisenhower matrix. So in other words, for those maybe who weren't on the call, very quickly, I'll just do a little quick recap. So it's with regard to what's important and what's urgent. Oftentimes, urgency is related to somebody else's goals. It'll help other people achieve what they need to achieve, but it doesn't actually help us achieve what we need to achieve. So in terms of this Eisenhower matrix, it looks at, okay, what are the things that we're actually doing that are urgent and they're important, and some of them that just aren't urgent, so they're not immediate. So again, Q2 there, deciding when to do it, those are often things that really mean something for us. It helps us meet our goals. It helps us achieve what we need to achieve. It helps us do well in our performance reviews. It helps us excel. Those are things that are important often in Q2 that are ours. It's things that we get to dictate time to do. For example, taking this webinar today, kind of taking that time for yourself and that learning would be in that blue box. Okay, it may not be urgent. Well, it could be, I suppose. But if we put those off, then oftentimes what's in the blue box will go into the green. So it becomes a crisis. It becomes more of an immediacy that we don't necessarily want it to be. Then we can't plan it. Then we have other non-important things to do, such as ones that are urgent, and it's not important. Somebody's bugging us to do something. Can someone else do it? In an ideal world, not always true, but it's worth a thought. And in the bottom right is, why are we doing it at all? So it's not urgent, and it's not important, so why is it crossing my desk? Why is it in my inbox? Typical example there, I see of things coming in my inbox that don't need to be there, and just reading it takes time. So why am I just not unsubscribing to that particular piece? Just as an example. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to write down. Some of you would have done it from the last session. I'll give you about a minute or so. Everything you can think of that's on your list of to-dos right now. And we'll wait, I'll give you about maybe 45 seconds to a minute to write down as much as you can. And I'm going to get you to put it in the respective box that makes sense to you. So write the list first, and then we'll do the exercise. All right, hopefully you've got at least 4 or 5 different things for the sake of time here today. I'll get you to actually put it in one of those boxes and think about when you're putting it in there, is it really in the right box? So take a minute and just plug them into the boxes. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so and see if you can plot them in those boxes. Don't get caught up in the name on the box. Just think about, is it urgent? Is it important? Is it not urgent or not important? All right. For those of you that are still doing it, please just take your time. I'm just curious, is anyone noticing anything? Are people having, which color or which box are you finding things are landing? Can you send me a note in the chat if you're comfortable saying so? You don't have to say what it is, or they'll feel free if you want to. What box are they ending up in? Where is the majority of things going? Blue, excellent. Like that. Green, yes. Sadly, Sherry, that's what or whoever it is there. Someone sent a note there around, oh, we got another blue. We have green. We have another one coming in, a few things in red. So by all means, take a look at that. And again, think about what box it's in, and then think about, should it be there? If you're not sure, if you want someone to look at it also, if you think it's in the green or the blue or even the red or the yellow, it's worth even checking in with somebody, because what you would do want to do is make sure you have the right things in the right box. Is it really important? Is it important to the organization? Is it important to you and your career? Nice to see those blues. Love the blues. So you're deciding, you're actually planning things out. You're not getting into what we call crisis management. So one thing here, I'm just going to show up while some of you might still be thinking about this. When you tie these two principles together, where should you be spending most of your time? So if you think about 80-20, where do you spend most of your time? This sort of gives you a visual of what it could be. So if we look at urgent, that's crisis mode. It's firefighting, it's deadlines, pressing things that you have to deal with. How much of our day should we be spending there? It's helping other people reach their goals, not us. So what they say is time allotment, maybe that could be 5%. Wouldn't that be nice? If you're client focused every day, chances are there's some client major crisis out there, but hopefully that's part of the job and not just something that's helping someone else. Then if you look at the productivity side, it's preparation, it's planning, it's relationship building, it's your career, it's your development, and those pieces are what make the difference for you. Those are the things that are going to help you succeed. When you look at the bottom, how much time is spent there? Not important, but urgent, right? Some of those things there are distractions. What can we do to delegate them? How can we, and then on the waste, I love this actually, this slide, because it's got things on there, socializing and trivia. Socializing, I don't necessarily call it a waste as a social person myself. It's just around how much time you spend at it. So if I've said 5% of my day, and you work that out to go and have a chat with someone while you're getting coffee, if you spend an extra 10 or 15 minutes doing that, maybe that's just enough. If it's more than that, maybe not so much. I love the TV piece. Hopefully you're not doing that at work. But it just gives you an idea of where you should be things should be falling. And in any day, just plot your box, put it in there, and say, what am I spending my time on? As well as we discussed last time, the Pareto effort and results principles as well. You can also use that to help in terms of your time management. So how easy do you think this is? Do you think that this is something you can visualize, you could actually use? How confident do you feel that you could actually use this moving forward? Just send me a little note. Do you think this is doable? This is something that you could use? Yeah, someone said it's very doable. I think the key here is taking those extra, when you're crazy day, where you're running around, you get your list, you got this, just take those few minutes to help you prioritize what's really important. Because theoretically, if there are things going in those bottom boxes, you really got to think about how much time you're spending there. The crisis piece, some of that you can't, change. But if there's things that you can alter, that would be great as well. So how do you start focusing in at least the upper two boxes, especially in the upper right? Excellent. All right, some tips. We're going to go through some tips, and I want you to absolutely shoot in. Is there any immediate tips anyone has around time management? Any suggestions or things that work really well for you that you can share? Feel free to pop it in the box. I'll pop through a few, but please fill it in, because heaven knows I probably am not going to hit all of your great ideas. So know when you're productive. Okay, so in other words, when I'm meeting with clients, especially if it's a coaching conversation, I'll say to them, when are you at your best in the day? And they're like, what? Some people are morning people, some people are afternoon people, some people actually prefer things around lunch. Know when you're productive, and when you're those pieces that mean the most, those really important things, schedule those accordingly. Sounds easy? Maybe not so much. If you have the ability to change a schedule, maybe with a client, with a colleague, or it's a meeting time, if you have the ability to do that, or if you just have to hunker down and get something done. I personally am a morning person, so I would, well, my kids kind of get in the way sometimes, but years ago, before I had kids, I would just get up at 5 in the morning and I'd go mad. By lunchtime, I'd pretty well have my whole day done. So again, understand when those are, because that's when productivity will really, that's when the effectiveness and the efficiency are going to come together. Now, I want to see what you think of this one. When under your extreme pressure for deadline, I've got 3 big things, for example, this week. I actually shut down my email for 2 hours yesterday. So some people just literally get hives when they hear that. Having said that, I believe in technology, and it's not just email. If somebody really wants to get me, they will call me. People can track me down. Oh, I've got someone on, someone can put on mute, that would be great. I'm getting a lot of feedback there. So ignore email possibly if you can, because guess what? They'll wait. If not, they will find you. Now, this is interesting. Sometimes we sit at our desk. Tell me if anyone does this. You sit at your desk, you have your little routine, maybe you go get your coffee, or you come back, or you poke at the news, or you do something quickly. And then all of a sudden, 15 minutes has gone by, 20 minutes has gone by. How do you make sure when you get to your desk, whatever type of workspace you have, that you can actually start 5 minutes of sitting down, you're actually productive. You're actually doing work, not just poking at something, checking something out, okay? Just think about that. Many of us do that. We have routines. This is a standard one from years ago. Touch everything once. Do you ever have things that you sort of look at and then you put them down again, and then you pick them up again, and then you lay them down again? Anytime you touch anything, if you're like me and you're slightly disorganized, I'm sure many of you are not, but for those that are, touch it once. If I touch a piece of paper, I shouldn't put it just in a pile for later. I should do something with it. So touch everything once. Okay. Now, if something you're waiting on, put it in your waiting file. I'm waiting. That's my pending file. Okay. So it's put away. It's gone into a place. If anyone's like me, try that one out. I don't do it all the time, but I try. Let people know the time you have and stick to it. If someone comes in my office and says, do you have a minute? I'll say, absolutely, I've got 5. I had a call yesterday, and out of the blue, I thought it was my client calling, and I had 3 minutes, and the person said, that's perfect, I can stick for 3 minutes. So we just hunkered right down to business. In 3 minutes, I had to go to talk to my client. So whatever time you have, stick to it. Let people know what it is up front, because let's face it, I don't want to go in and bug you and keep you from something or distract you from something, right? That's not my goal if I go in to see you. So I love this, actually. Be ruthless with time, but gracious with people. Ruthless with time, but gracious with people. I can cut people off. I don't know if anyone's found this. I'm not sure who's on. I think it's Pam. If there's a Pam on the call, you keep coming up there. If you could put it on mute. So be ruthless with time, gracious with people. So if I come into your office and you're like really frazzled and I want to come talk to you, you could be really nice and tell me that it's not going to work. And oh my gosh, Heather, I'd love to talk to you. I'm just doing this right now. Can I come see you later? Absolutely, no problem, right? I'll be around all afternoon, right? So your time is precious, but be gracious with people and how you talk to them about it. All right, write down what you think constitutes time well spent. Again, take time, sit down and work through the Eisenhower matrix as an example. Understand what that means and ask your leader to do the same thing. What's important? So here are the things, like here's a list of 10 things or 10 projects or 10 client files that I'm working on. What do you think is my most important things right now? Make sure that you're aligned, because if you're not, it doesn't matter how much you think you're in the blue, you're in that quadrant 2, you may not be. Okay, so really understand what makes sense for them and for your leader as much as the organization, but sometimes they're not exact. SMART goals, set those goals. Now, anyone who gets overwhelmed, I don't know if that's you, but if anyone gets overwhelmed, then you really need to think about setting goals for yourself. For example, I've got a bunch of things on the go right now, and I actually felt overwhelmed today. So I actually sat down and said, what's this? I'm writing this bunch of different reports and things, and one of them is really difficult. And I thought, oh, how do I just, you know, you procrastinate. You're like, oh gosh, I can't believe I have to do that. It's going to be so difficult. What's one simple little thing you can do? What's one tiny little goal that I can get done today? By 3 o'clock, I'm going to get the introduction done. And it takes the pressure off, breaking down something that's really monumental into small little tasks that you can fit in small periods of time that you might have in the span of your day. Manage using the Eisenhower principle. Multitasking doesn't work. I know it feels like it does, but it doesn't. And I'm highly distractible, so I can tell you this doesn't work. So when you're actually multitasking, make sure some people can say they're multitasking, but they're actually focusing on one piece and then flipping very quickly to something else. You can't do multiple things at once, just so you know. Oh, this is a great one. You can get tons of work done in even 30 minutes. Don't float. This idea is really interesting. And I actually thought about this yesterday, knowing I was doing the session today. And I actually thought I was about, I can't remember what time it was, about 20 minutes to the hour anyway. And I had 20 minutes between then and a meeting. And I thought, I'm not going to float. So floating would mean just poke at something, do something really simple, not really use that 20 minutes productively. So I actually consciously thought, I'm not going to float. I'm going to actually hunker down and get 4 or 5 lines of that report done. And I did. Okay. So again, don't float. It's so easy when you have time that you kind of float around. You're not productive during those 20 or 30 minutes, even though you could be, because you're waiting for something else to happen. Okay. So think about that as well. Last few, take mini breaks. Really, the research says that if you take a few 10 minutes, 15 minutes here or there, there's a reason why in Europe they have these siestas and things. Of course, a little different over there, but the concept is that if you can take a break and you can relax, you can sit for a minute. Some actual offices have quiet rooms, not many, but some of them actually do, just to refresh. It does make a huge difference to refocus. Learn to say no. So think about that matrix, right? So when you've got somebody coming and asking you, if you're one of those people that can't say no, you have to learn to say no. You can say no very nicely, by the way. It could be, I would love to do that. I'm just so overwhelmed right now. I don't think I can give it the time it deserves. Is there someone else that you could recommend, right? Don't pass the monkey, though. Like, just don't take it on and then hand it around because it's something nobody wants to do. Really own it up front. And it's okay to say no. Even if, say, for example, you're in your career and you really want to get to the next level, you can still say no to your boss, because again, what are you going to take on to the point of exhaustion where you're not going to help anybody, but, so the organization wants you to be productive in the right ways. As long as you're doing that, if something comes up that's not really important, it's not really urgent, and you're not sure if it's something you should do, you can say no. Maybe offer a suggestion for someone else or whatever it might be. It can happen. It's not easy to do. Plan your day, delegate, delegate, delegate. Not a lot of you have that option, but think about it. Within your organization as a whole, there's probably people out there that you can actually find that can take some things on. Sometimes summer students, I don't know if any of you guys have summer students coming up now or anything like that. How do you use them to your advantage? How do you take those things that are in those bottom quadrants, especially the one in the bottom left, so delegate that you can delegate? And then we get into meetings. So that's what we're going to segue into now. And for the last 25 minutes or so, we're going to talk about meetings. So how many meetings do we do? Some people I've heard, say, well, gee, I only have really 1 meeting a week. I guess that's really how you classify a meeting as well. Sometimes meetings are impromptu. They just happen. You ever had it where you're walking by someone's door and all of a sudden there's 3 of you and they're talking about a certain project, a certain client file, renewal, whatever the heck it might be. So how effective is that? It might be very effective. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying, really, when you have meetings, whether they're scheduled or not, but ideally scheduled, how do you make them effective? right? How to actually take the effectiveness piece that we talked about for time management and also efficiency. So how do you do the right things and do them very efficiently? All right. We're going to talk about what's a meeting for, some techniques around meetings, and some roles. You may know this already. This might be stuff you've seen before. Just think about something by the end of this next 25 minutes, one or two things that you can interject into your meeting. You can plan a little differently, right? That you can execute the meeting a little differently. So take a minute. I just wanted you to take 1 minute or less and just list the meetings, think in your head, the meetings that you've had in the last week, over the last week, and upcoming in the next week, if you can. Again, you don't have to write them all down. Whatever you can think of. All right. Hopefully you have a couple there that we can speak to. We'll talk about them in a minute. If you think about types of meetings, there's really two kinds of meetings. And I can ask you, but I'm just going to put it up here for time, but also, participative meetings and information sharing meetings. So when I was working in your industry in an HR capacity, I absolutely would think about this all the time. I would have leaders over the different companies I worked in within your industry who had meetings, and I would often ask the same question, and I didn't realize it was effective, but I think it was. So what's the purpose of the meeting, right? What do we actually want to accomplish? What's the outcome of the meeting? So there's two types of meetings. Sometimes it's mostly one-way communication, and sometimes it's everyone has input. So I often say, now this isn't true for everything, but I often say, if you can put it in an email, why are we having a meeting? Now, there are caveats to that. So if you can put it in an email, absolutely, so people can think about it. There obviously, even if it's meant to be one way, sometimes you just have to hear it from the head of the company. You have to hear it from the vice president. Somebody has to actually deliver it in a way that brings everyone together, and even if it's one-way communication. But it shouldn't be like that very often. I sit in meetings all the time with clients. I go in client meetings, and often, even when I do sessions, I'd say one of the biggest things, not even around meetings, just around teams, things that come out of it are our meetings are terrible. Very few places have really effective meetings. I have never sat through I should say never. It's a handful that I've sat through that have naturally become effective versus intervention helps them become more effective. So again, we look at participative meetings. Are these meetings where we're sharing information one way, or are we participating, or is it a combination? A lot of times I hear combination meetings where you'll have people just going around and saying, oh, here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing. Now, the question is that the best use of your time? Maybe it is. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's worth considering. Is this the best use of our time to sit here and hear about what all these other people are doing? And it absolutely might be if it dramatically impacts your own department or your own area. Having said that, how much could be in an email before the meeting so that you know exactly what's coming up and you can think about it? Not everyone can respond super quickly in a meeting. So I work with lots of different types of styles and personalities, and some people, and I'm sure there's some people on the call, who need to think things through. So if I need to think things through, if I want to hear what's going on in your area, sometimes I need to think about it. I can't respond immediately. I can't process it that fast. Okay, so some people are not great at that. So it's hard when you often don't have the information shared in advance. So what I want you to do, look at your list of meetings. How many of them are participating? I.e., you're inputting. You actually are contributing to the meeting. Have a quick look. I'm hoping you're circling all of the meetings. There's at least some level of participation within the meeting. If not, it's worth questioning. Okay. And even when you're participating, are you prepared for the meeting in advance? Do you actually get the information in advance so you can participate effectively? Are you focusing on the right things in the meeting? So we're going to talk about some techniques and things to try to get you there today. All right, so basic meeting process. You've got the planning before the meeting, you've got during the meeting, you start, you conduct the meeting, you close. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? Then after the meeting, follow up. Okay, so we're just going to run through these pretty quickly. So in terms of before the meeting, I'm clarifying the purpose and outcome of the meeting. This often doesn't happen. Sometimes people have standard meetings. Okay, that's fair. Maybe every 2 weeks or every week you sit down with your team and you actually, but there is an outcome. There is a perceived outcome. We're going to understand X. We're going to meet every week to do Y. Okay, so identifying who needs to be there. There's another kicker. Does everyone need to be there all the time? If I'm sitting in meetings and sometimes it's 2 hours later, and over the years, and even with my clients, I'm like, so who needs to stay for this part of the meeting? Maybe we're digressing into something that Mary and Joe don't need to be involved in, and it's just wasting their precious time. So do you need to stay? Do they need to go to all the meetings? Do they come to the meeting at all? Do they need to be there for all the meetings? Or can they send a delegate, right? Can someone else come along to the meeting and bring back the information or present on their behalf or give opinions on their behalf? Then you've got elements of planning around what do you actually want to accomplish? Okay, are we actually looking at analyzing information, right? Are we actually deciding on something today? Like, is this something like we really got to make a decision on X? So then people need to know that in advance. People need to know if it's just, we're going to talk about this, we need to decide by the end of the month, but we're going to actually have a discussion so we can really understand what we need to do with this client, as an example. Or we got to make a decision, it's got to go, it's got to go to market. So whatever it is, what is it that you need to do in the meeting? It could, and you can do this verbally. You can say, look, we want to brainstorm about this, right? Or we need to make a decision on this. People need to know. If a decision's being made, people need to know exactly how that's going to happen. Who's deciding, right? So if I'm the leader, it could be, I have to make the decision in the next 2 weeks. I want your input. It could be, I really want to make sure we're all aligned on this and we come to a decision we can all live with, right? There's different approaches to that. An agenda, oh, it could be so easy, guys. Now I'll show you one in a minute when we get to it, but there's ways that you can do a very quick agenda. It doesn't have to be time consuming. Sending it to them early enough. Don't send it to them like I have a meeting now, a board meeting for a nonprofit I'm on, and I just got all the material in right before this call, and it's pretty well right after this call. Or this session. So you can imagine now, I'm not going to have much time to have a quick read through that now, am I? Luckily, I can skim things quickly. I've trained myself to do things quite quickly, but it doesn't give me a lot of ability to prepare and feel like I'm going to be the most effective in that meeting. And then, of course, you've got your more logistical stuff. So in terms of the actual meeting itself, right, I'm just going to show you a couple of quick things to think about. And then we're going to get into some roles as well. And then that'll be it for today because time is a ticking. All right, so warm-ups. Now, these could be, I'll just pop these all up here. These could be so simple. Every time I do a day-long session or half-day session or something, I'll often do a little warm-up exercise just to get people into could be into the topic. It could be people that don't meet together very often so they get to know each other. Those are easy. The ones that you do for meetings, regular meetings with your team, right? How do you jazz it up a little bit? It could be each person every week comes up with a 2-minute question or query or fun little exercise or something. You don't have to do this. Every once in a while, it is great to do, especially if people are stressed out, if there's a new person on the team. It could be asking a question, fun little exercise. I do like 2 truths and a lie. I don't know if you've ever done that. Like little ones like that every once in a while, if it's a big meeting that you're having, is really helpful to get everyone speaking. It could also be around the topic. Right? So if I'm having a meeting around a certain area, it could be around, what are your first ideas? I want everyone to go around the room and just have, what's your first idea that comes to mind when we think about this? Or what's the biggest challenge right now we have with this renewal? Or whatever it might be. Just getting people into it and feeling like they're participating right away. Okay? Again, think about it. You don't have to do it all the time. In terms of the agenda, so you're sending it out in advance, but you're going to use it during the meeting. So how do you actually create an agenda that makes sense? So some things you can include the purpose, the time estimates. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Topics, who's leading a certain section, what methods and outcomes are we using? So what do we actually need to accomplish and what methods, like decision-making methods? Okay, sounds like a lot, but it really doesn't have to be. And when you get into doing this, you get very focused and you get very specific, especially with time. So I've got a sample one here. Just, again, you don't have to use this, but just to give you an idea. How much time are we allocating, right? And you have to have a timekeeper, which we'll talk about after, to keep you on track. Because time is so precious and it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole. It's so easy for someone who might be more verbal, long-winded, or very detail-oriented maybe to go on for too long, to get sidetracked, to not stay on point. Okay, so those things need to be addressed, and time is one piece of that. What's the topic itself we need to do? What do we actually need to accomplish, right? What are we actually doing? So we're going to do our warm up. We're going to have our review of our last minutes. Again, we'll talk about minutes as well. We need to brainstorm. Here's what we actually need to brainstorm. Okay, we need to talk about a few other things, and then we need to clue up the meeting. Who's actually running each piece of that? And shouldn't always be the leader. If you're the leader and you have meetings, if you're the leader of the team, think about that. If you're the one who's constantly managing the agenda, managing this, why can't other people do it? Right? Sign of a good team is you can share those responsibilities. And guess what? You can actually sit back and listen to other people and give them a chance to start sort of running the meeting. But it doesn't mean you're not going to have a say. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to say what you need to say. It'll get you off having to worry about what the next topic is, right? Having someone else take those responsibilities. If we're doing decisions, what does that look like? What, are we brainstorming? Are we doing open discussion? And what are the actual outcomes? This is one of the biggest things that I see missing. What do we need? What's the outcome we need for this section or this meeting itself? How do we stick that? So we've agreed now we're going to be here for 30 minutes. We're going to talk about this, and this is the outcome. As a coach, I ask people, so what do you want to get out of today's session? We're very focused on that agenda. It can change, don't get me wrong, if something else comes up, but what do you really need to do today? What's the biggest thing that can bring of the most value for you? Okay. So that's just a sample agenda for thinking about. In terms of meeting ground rules, ground rules are really helpful. Does anyone, can you put in the chat, and you don't have to, you can do it privately. Is there anyone there that actually has meeting ground rules right now in their team? No one yet. All right, so obviously it's not a big thing you have. Highly recommend this. Oh, somebody's working on it. That's always promising. So this will hopefully spur you on to keep going. So with meeting ground rules, you have to think about so many things that affect the effectiveness and the efficiency of the meeting, okay? What we're focusing on and how we're actually having the meeting or conducting the meeting. Okay, so you have to agree with them, ideally as a team, right? You can implement them as a company and actually say, here are our basic meeting ground rules. It could be aligning with things like confidentiality. It could be aligning with things around, some general things. But I would argue that each team itself should have their own, okay? And then review it and you change as required. It's not stagnant. You have to look at it and change it. Some typical ones that I would see would be attendance, promptness, right? So what happens, here's the thing. What happens if Mary's late to the meeting? Do we go on without her? If Mary's the first person up in the meeting, and she's supposed to actually start off the meeting, maybe Mary's the leader. So what do you do, right? What do we do? Do we say, okay, we're going to start anyway? We're going to skip beyond that. We'll go back to it. What do we do? What happens when people aren't late? Are they supposed to call? Are they supposed to email? Are they supposed to, I'm going to be 10 minutes late getting into the meeting, so it gives people time to start the meeting and knowing when the person's going to come, right? How do we know that each person's contributing? Right? Do we have it so that each person needs to be asked about their contribution in terms of their thoughts, their ideas, right? Decision making, how do we make decisions in the meeting? Now that can change, right? And meeting evaluation, how are we going to evaluate how these meetings are going? And what happens if people don't do this stuff? What happens if Joe is constantly late? What's our responsibility as team members? If somebody violates the ground rules, to say, Joe, we set these ground rules. And what I do as well when I'm in sessions and we create topics around teams, which alas, meetings come into it almost every time, I get people to sign it. So here's the ground rules, let's sign it. Every 3 months, I say, you've got to review these ground rules. Make sure they make sense, make sure you're holding each other accountable to it, okay? So if I'm violating them, then it's your responsibility to tell me, as much as my responsibility to try not to violate them. Okay, so highly recommend this. Simple as, do we have minutes? Do we not have minutes? Do we have just someone taking away outcomes? How do we, do we have someone reminding us before the next meeting? What are the things that the processes? How are we going to hold each other accountable to it? Okay, just some things to get you going. Okay, so lastly, we're going to walk through the roles. So there's lots of different names and the different roles, but we're going to walk through a few just to give you an idea. Facilitating. Now, I'm assuming lots of people on the call have actually been the facilitator of the meeting. So you're kind of running the meeting, okay? I don't mean in terms of decision making. This is someone, like, for example, if I go into a team, often if we have a session, it's a facilitation, right? I go in, it's a lot of discussion and dialogue around different areas, and I'm facilitating it. We're talking about, yeah, here's the topic we're talking about. Maybe people are talking over each other, right? So facilitating that as well. Making sure everyone's heard, right? So managing that participation piece. Really capturing, okay, so is that a decision now? Is that what, okay, so what's the outcome here? What's the decision? Who's taking that? Who's taking that on? Whose responsibility is that? Doesn't mean I'm making the decision. It's capturing it in the sense of agreement. Okay, so fair enough. So we're going to brainstorm about that next time. What's going to happen? Okay, that person's not writing that stuff down necessarily. They could be doing multiple roles. But who's the person who's running that meeting? I highly recommend for practice, if you have a team that's comfortable, is to actually change that around. Change all of these around. I'm the worst, though, at minutes or taking any notes from meetings. I'm terrible. Even when I'm on boards, I say, don't make me secretary. I'm really bad because I like to be involved. I can't do multitasking. So again, recognize your strengths as well. So who's the scribe? Is there a whiteboard or something where you're capturing the information? Remember, not everyone thinks the same way and learns the same way. You need visuals often. Highly recommend, even if it's a ground rule. Look, if you want to get up and start putting stuff on the board, just go do it, right? Some people need to have those visual pieces. It could be a diagram, it could be a chart, it just could be numbers you're talking about. Some people are very visual learners, so you really need to have a visual representation. If you're capturing ideas, make sure the ideas are large enough so everyone can see it. Abbreviate points when you can, but make sure when a decision's made, put it up there. Help that minutes person, right? Just put it up there on the board or whatever and say, okay, so here's what we're deciding on, right? We're going to these markets, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Write it down if you need to, right? I'm talking about a big client, obviously, not every day. In terms of a timekeeper, this is not an easy job. Some people, there's always one in every group that actually likes to be timed, right? They like to actually be responsible for time and keep things on track. So it's a warning of, hey, I know we have to make a decision here, but we don't seem to be getting close, and we've got only 10 more minutes allocated to this topic, right? Keeping people moving, it helps people sort of charge them up. Okay, all right, fair enough, guys. Now we got off track on this. Let's get back in. So the facilitator, as much as the timekeeper, can help things move forward. And again, you don't have to be regimented and really overly disciplined. It could be, we're just going to say, yeah, it's about half an hour. We're going to talk about this. Then somebody keeps an eye on the time. Okay, guys, we've been 25 minutes. We've got 5 minutes to go. Oh, we're at our 30 minutes. How do we feel about stopping now? Or just say that, and the facilitator can take it from there. The facilitator can't do it all. They can't keep track on time. They can't make all the notes. They can't facilitate and make sure everyone's participating. Decisions are getting made. Okay? So the note taker. I say note taker, not minutes. You don't necessarily have to have minutes from every meeting. But one thing you do need to have is some sort of record of something. It could be decisions. It could be who's taking responsibility. It could be timelines around what needs to happen. It could be who's getting back to who. So the note taker, though, is essentially just making those notes. It could be very simple. It could be 5 bullets, whatever it is. Okay, so Mary, you're going to do this. Correct? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So Joe, you're going to go off and do this. I'm going to get this done. I'll get that over to you by tomorrow noon. And then we're going to have to get back and regroup after that. Fair enough. It could be as simple as that. Somebody just has to keep track of that. In an ideal world, whether you produce minutes or you put it in a shared file or you just send an email out, FYI, here's 3 or 4 things that takeaways. Here's who's responsible and here's the timelines. Okay. So it adds to the level of accountability. Right. All right. The meeting itself. Now, there's lots of people ask me lots of questions as a longtime facilitator on how do you manage things properly? Number one, you can't do it all. If you're the one conducting the meeting, you're the one facilitating the meeting, you can't be the timekeeper, you can't be the note taker, you can't do it all. Okay. So just recognize that. If you think you can, one thing is going to drop. You're not going to do it all really effectively. So how do you actually do it? A lot of times things go off track. I think everyone on the call can recognize people who are, there's long-winded people. There's people who get into too much detail. There's people who don't stay high level enough. There's people who stay too high level and don't get into the execution. There's so many things that can happen in a meeting. The kicker there is trying to pull people back, rein people in as a facilitator if you're conducting it in a way that's, again, ruthless with time, gracious with people. No different with here. Staying on track, being ruthless about that in a very kind way. So there's a lot, you can go online and look it up. There's simple things you can, so, I recognize that this is obviously really important to you. We're getting a little bit off track here. Can be important? Like there's ways that you can do that. Or why don't we take that offline, right? Facilitators can say that. Other people in the team can say, let's take that offline. Why don't we talk about that right after the meeting, right? There's ways that you can set up even ground rules around that. Okay, so how do you keep it moving? How do you manage participation? Not everyone on the call is going to be the first one to speak. How do you pull on people that aren't that comfortable? You're going to have people in your teams, as an example, who, and even clients, who are not open. They don't really tell you what they're really thinking because they just want to go along with it. They want to be a great team player, or they don't want to hurt your feelings. Sometimes you need to ask questions that, Mary, I'm just curious now. I know that you're going along with it, but what would be one thing that would make you pause here? What would be one thing that would make you think this could be challenging for us to do, or this could be a difficult one to place, right? So asking those questions and digging a little deeper for everyone on your team. You're going to have some people that are going to speak up all the time, some people that aren't. Don't overwhelm the people who don't want to speak a lot, but make sure there is some level of contribution. And if you're the leader on the call here today, you can ask people, look, I really want you to contribute more. What's comfortable for you, right? Because I've had real introverts who actually said, look, I'm going to take the information a week in advance. So say the agenda's gone out, all the information's gone out, maybe on the client file or whatever it is, and the person will say, I'm going to send a little note in before the meeting so you can put my idea forward. Okay, could be a real technical, quiet person who's not really comfortable. That's okay. They're doing their job and they're presenting their ideas maybe in advance or even after the meeting. You can have a discussion around it. All right, quickly, we'll get through the last bit. Sorry, I'm going to have to whip through this a little bit just to get through it. Has anyone seen a RACI chart before? Some people, it's RASI as well. Or CI, sorry, would be the original. Anyone seen a RACI chart before? I would have brought it up, I think, when we talked about strategy, but RACI charts are great for meetings as well, or just to get your head wrapped around who's doing what and what does that mean. So a lot of times in teams, I'll have someone say, well, I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea. I should know what they're doing, but they've never told me. So again, it helps people understand their role. Okay, so it could be on a file, it could be with a project, it could be an ongoing, sales meetings or whatever the heck it is what you're actually responsible for. So it's just an acronym and it stands for, so the accountable, the A is who's ultimately accountable. Often it's the leader, it could be the head of the organization, whatever it is, who signs off, right? They're not necessarily involved in the day-to-day. It could be, look, I'm ultimately responsible, but ultimately accountable, for this happening and this executing or us getting that renewal, but so-and-so is actually responsible for going out and talking to the client, and I'll just keep an eye on it from high level. So the responsibility is doing the task. Now they popped in the S. It used to be just CI. Consulted, who's consulted? So who needs to be brought in, consulted before a decision's made or before something happens, right? Maybe I had the client and now it's your client and you want to consult me before a decision's made or you go to market. With regard to the I could just be informed, right? FYI, here's the challenges we got going on, or here's the renewal, or whatever the heck it is, right? I just need to be informed. And are there support people as well? Are there support people in there that can help you? So it's worth actually, how I see people doing it. This is a simple RACI, just to give you an idea. So if you have different people on top, say it could be even just Mary, Joe, Bob, whatever on top. You've got your tasks on the side. Maybe it's a big renewal. Here's the task. Who's actually responsible for this file, right? Or this client? Who's actually responsible, accountable for it? It's probably the leader. Could be accountable and responsible, by the way. Who needs to be informed? Who needs to be consulted? Maybe maybe there's some, you need to talk to someone in claims. I don't know, who knows, right? Who needs to be aware of it? Maybe it's risk oriented if you have a risk manager. So who needs to be informed and who needs to be consulted? And it just gives you a little quick snapshot. You can go online, look up RACI, RACI or RASCI, and you can get lots of information on this. So quickly, closing the meeting, which I have to close this meeting now shortly. Summarize decisions, just make sure nothing else you do, even if you don't come up with an actual decision, or now you come up with what are we doing next? Okay, we didn't decide on it. Next meeting, we have to make a decision. When's that meeting going to be by? Who's gonna put that meeting together? Who's sending the invite out? If nothing else, you come up with that. Okay, so those are the actions. Are there actually decisions made? What are the next steps? Drafting the agenda for the next meeting. Okay, so what are we going to talk about the next meeting? Another one, which I highly recommend if you have standard meetings, especially after you've now had this session, is evaluating the meeting. I'll give you a couple of quick questions you can ask. Because what's the point of having it if it's not effective and efficient, right? So, and thank everyone for their participation. So some questions you can ask: what worked well in this meeting? Maybe you say you have a meeting a week or every 2 weeks, maybe every third or fourth meeting you have it in your agenda to evaluate the meeting. What worked well? What were the challenges? Maybe how did we went off track this time, we did this, well, what could help next time so that doesn't happen? Maybe someone you didn't involve in the meeting. Oh, next time we got to make sure we involve this person in the meeting, right? Evaluate your meetings on a consistent basis. If you have a leadership team meetings, you should be doing this at least every third meeting. It should only take a couple of minutes. The more you do it, the quicker it is to come to it. Then, of course, you get distributing documents. As someone like myself who is very distracted and distractible, get off on, shiny object over here. Having someone sending out the notes is really helpful. It could be, here's the 5 bullets from the meeting. Heather, here's your takeaways. Here's the things that you need to do. Yours are in red, Heather. Which I used to have an assistant who did that. She was awesome. And then you plan for the next meeting. All right, so that was a quick down and dirty around meetings. You can see how some things could be interjected. What did you like the best? What was the one thing here that you found either is the most effective in your meetings or you'd like to use, which you think could be effective? Just pop that in the chat before you go today. What are you going to commit to? What's 1 or 2 things that you can commit to? Shoot something out or something that you do well. Prioritize, yes, prioritize in your time, prioritize in your meetings, please, please. Yes, before checking your emails. Emails are such a huge waste of time, I have to say. So I love that, absolutely. One more person. Send me a line. All right, ground rules, love it, love it. Awesome, so thank you very much. It was a down and dirty today, very quick. So I hope you found it helpful. Any suggestions for me, please do evaluate my meeting or my session today would be lovely. Anything you want to send along in the chat or through IBANs would be great. And we'll see you hopefully next month. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.